All right, man, so we are in week 1 of responsibility. The last topic we covered was acceptance and thoroughly understanding the things we can't change and taking responsibility to control the things that we can. So we're going to dive deeper into this, and we're going to start first with thoroughly understanding what responsibility is not, and that is we are going to dive into what it means to be a victim and to have a victim mindset. Now, whenever I've shared thoughts like these, people usually rise up and get offended. The victim word is a very bad word, derogatory to people who are in victimhood. And when they hear the word, they get really upset. So I'm going to tread lightly here in the sense and just really dive deep and understand this mentality. But I'd like to first start off with that victimization is different from victimhood. And that is having something happen to you that is beyond your control and that was forced upon you. You could have become a victim in that situation. But victimhood is a lot deeper and a lot different than that. It is accepting the reality and everything that situation communicated and believing all the lies, and then really failure to take responsibility to move towards healing. And that's where this idea of victimhood comes in. So we're going to start. There was two researchers who published their findings in the Journal of Psychology. And they studied college students biased towards taking responsibility for themselves or making fraudulent excuses. There's nothing I could have done type. And you know this type, I've been this type. You may see this a little bit in yourself, or you may see this in others, and that is that there's nothing I could have done type. They found 72% of the students admitted to making excuses. That is the ones who said, there's nothing more that I could have done. 72% of them made excuses. And far interesting is their grade point average was a lot lower. So that's the study. If you say, there's nothing I really could have done, and begin to make fraudulent excuses, it correlates to and it shows in your grade point average. And so that is an interesting reality. But if we are going to have the mindset of victimhood and say, constantly take the stance of there's nothing that I could have done better, and not take responsibility and place the blame on other people, it's going to affect our outcomes. And that is just the reality of the condition. I'd like to say, first of all, that this condition is definitely hereditary. It comes down in the form of iniquity and is passed from generation to generation. And our first parents, Adam and Eve, practiced the victimhood mentality thoroughly. And that is this. Adam said, it is that woman that you gave me. She gave me the fruit and I ate. And so what Adam did was he shifted responsibility from himself to his wife. And not only that, but he put God in the equation too, because it is God that gave him the wife. And so what he was ultimately doing is shifting the whole responsibility back on God. And so I say that to say this is that we shouldn't be surprised about this mentality, and we shouldn't be depressed or discouraged if we find a little bit of that in us, because the reality is that we're born into it and we're shaped into it, and we learn this behavior to pass the buck and to shift responsibility onto other people, to take the burden and the light off of us, right? To justify our weaknesses, to give excuses for our shortcomings, and to give a reason why that we might have failed to measure up. So saying that is, I'm going to say this, that there is a path to victimhood. There is a path. And it is a cycle, and it's very predictable. And that is, something happens, a situation happens, whatever it is, the conclusion is that it's not my fault, right? It is not my fault that I have fallen short. It's not my fault that I didn't keep the agreement. It goes something like this. You promised to be on time in a certain thing, and then you go into all the excuses why you weren't on time. But the fact and the reality is that you could have had some forethought and perceived the things that might come your way and left early to make sure you were on time. So no matter what, it's your responsibility to be on time. But what we do is we say, well, it's not my fault, right? And we point into all the reasons why it's not our fault. And so blame shifting is the automatic first thing in this failure to take responsibility, is that I am going to put the responsibility on the other person. And what this leads to is step 2, and it communicates to us, to our hearts and to our minds, that we had a severe lack of control over the outcomes. Now, if it is true victimhood and something come upon you and you were victimized, you did have lack control over the outcomes. But victimhood is something far different, and that is claiming that it's not your fault when you had some responsibility in the matter, and then coming to the conclusion that you could have not impacted the results in any way or fashion, right? I'll show you how this looks like. I took a class for construction. To be a construction manager. I took the hardest class. I could have took the easier route. There was 2 routes to construction manager. I was like, I could do the hard route. I'm smart. I'm intelligent, right? And so I went through the class and I paid attention. I did everything, right? And then I was cocky and I felt confident in myself that I had the test. And so what did I do? I drank the night before and probably the night before that. I drank 2 nights in a row. And then I showed up hungover to take the test. And what happened? I failed the test. And the reason why I failed the test is because I failed to take responsibility. It was nobody else's fault but my own. And I could have passed the story that it's somebody else's fault and that I had this extreme lack of control over the outcomes. And oh, is me, look what happened, right? So we see, number 1 is it's not my fault. I'm going to shift it onto somebody else. And number 2 is that I didn't have real control over the outcomes. Number 3, if you don't have control over the outcomes, what does that do to your motivation to rise up and to take authority and to fix it? If it's not my fault, it's not my responsibility, and I have no control over my outcomes, my motivation goes down and my action towards the problem decreases. And that means that I don't rise to the problem. I don't challenge the problem. I don't meet the problem head on. I lose my motivation because I have no control over this outcome. Which leads us to number 4, bad results. Negative outcomes. Outcomes that we are not satisfied and that we are not pleased with. Why? Once again, we shifted the blame to somebody else. We claimed that we had lack of control over the outcomes, not understanding that we had great power to affect it. We had great power to influence a different outcome. And that lowered our motivation and we got bad results, bad outcomes. And this, of course, leads to sinking inside of the victimhood story and the victimhood mentality that just circles around and around the same cycle of blame shifting. Not my problem. I couldn't have done any better than I did. And then it leads to the same results. But what begins to happen is this cycle as it begins to get deeper and deeper. And all of a sudden, this victimhood story affects every single area of your life. You go into relationships and they become dysfunctional. And you look at them and say, it's all her fault. I didn't have no part to play in this. And then it communicates to your mind that you're not in control of any form of the outcome. So what do? You lose motivation and you stop. And then you continue the story of victimhood. And this is the way the process goes. Now, the opposite process goes far different. And that is, number 1, I look at this situation and I ask myself, what could I have done differently? And this is where the growth mindset comes in. And this is where honesty comes in. Because I truly look at that and say, at this situation and ask myself, what could I have done differently in this situation? Now, we know this for certainty, that if you have been victimized and if you have experienced trauma, that you are a true victim. Now, the choice of victimhood is this, is that I'm going to believe every lie, everything that situation communicated to me. That I am weak, that I am defenseless, that I don't have the ability to stand up for myself, that I'm this and I'm that. And what we do is we accept all the lies that situation communicated to us. And then what do we do thereafter? Instead of taking responsibility to walk towards healing, we settle down in victimhood, and we don't take responsibility for our healing, and we don't see how we can respond any differently because it's not our fault. You would behave the same way too if this happened to you. And so we just sink down inside of the pit of excuses. But if we say, you know what could I have done differently? How can I respond better that is going to lead me to health and going to lead me to life? You see, even if we had a situation come upon us, our responsibility still lies in taking steps towards healing. And staying in the victim role and not taking step towards healing is failure in your responsibility. And that is looking at the situation. What can I do better? How can I respond better? How can I walk towards healing in this situation? How can I stop digging? I talked to you about previously about if you find yourself in a pit, stop digging. And it's taking that responsibility. If you find yourself in a situation that you have been victimized in some way or fashion, stop digging. Stop making things worse. Take responsibility for how you're responding to this situation, and take responsibility to step out and begin to walk towards the light. Begin to walk towards healing. So number 2, if I look at the situation and say, what could I have done differently? I'm communicating to my mind and my heart that I have the ability to influence some things that are going on. And that is that it gives in me a greater sense of control over my outcomes. Now, when we are victimized, somebody did something to us and they are trying to control the outcomes. And what we do is we give the perpetrator clout, and we give them ammunition. And not only did they hurt us once, but they continually hurt us over and over by the rehearsing and the decisions that we are making. And so what do? We give them power to hurt us repeatedly over and over and over again. So making a new decision, asking yourself, what can I do differently in this situation, equips you back with empowerment. And say, you know what, I have the ability to influence this situation. I have the ability to choose my response moving forward. I have the ability and the responsibility to walk towards healing. And that gives you a greater sense of control over your outcomes, which produces what? A lot more motivation. Now that you understand that you have the ability to sway the certain outcomes that are taking place in your life, motivation begins to rise. All of a sudden, you feel the sense of responsibility, and you see the many options, and you see the choices that you can make. And this leads us to number 4, better results, better outcomes. And this only comes through really recognizing this process. And lastly, this leads to a growth mentality. And that is that I don't feel stuck inside of victimhood, that nothing, I couldn't have done anything better, that everything is that person's fault, and I don't accept responsibility to get up and to begin to progress towards my healing. But the growth mentality is this expansion, and it's coming out of that victimhood story, and it's making the choices that are going to get you better results and that are going to cause you to begin to thrive inside of your life. So there's definitely 2 paths. The path of victimhood starts with, I couldn't have done anything different. It's not my fault. And the path out of victimhood to the growth mindset says, what can I do differently? How can I make better decisions? And that leads to a whole different outcome. So the choice is ours of which one we want to fall into. Now, if you have had a victim mentality or have been in victimhood, you will see your entire life through the perspective of the thing that has happened to you that has made you a victim. So, if you by chance have a diagnosis, you will see everything through the lens of that diagnosis. It's funny how we so identify with our diseases and our and the things that the labels. We so identify with these things that we call them my MS, my bipolar, my depression, right? And we so identify with them that it's hard to get any new mindset to say, you know what? How can I see things differently? How can I make better choices? How can I not so identify with my disease that I could see who I really am? And this is a really good. So victimization is the seeing things through the victim mindset, and it's seeing life as very negative, right? As things that happen to you. Now, I'm not debating that things have happened to you. They've happened to me. They've happened to mostly every person that I've come in contact with has a story of victimhood, of victimization in some way or fashion, right? The reality is that things do happen to me, and they happen to everybody, and that it's not a strange occurrence that that they have happened. As I listen to other people's stories, I see that they have faced the same challenges that I have faced. But the victimization, it's seeing everything that has happened to you. And we see everything through that negative lens. And we see as nothing within the realm of our control. And that other people should simply give us sympathy and should pity us because we have somehow deserved something better inside of our lives. Now, this is the main power of victimhood, is that there is a lot of pity. There is a lot of sympathy, if you will. And there's a lot of benefits to remaining a victim. There is. And if you be honest with yourself, you can see the benefits. So whenever I step into the victim role, whether it's in my family, faith, fitness, and finance, you can guarantee that there is some sort of benefit that I am getting from victimhood. I'm getting to opt out, and that is that I got an excuse of why I'm not participating. I get to opt out, right? I get to rehearse my hurts to people over and over again repeatedly. And what does that do? It gets them into the realm of sympathy. Is that they begin to pity you and oh, poor baby, right? And so we have to be honest with ourselves and say, you know what, if I am choosing victimhood, if I'm choosing not to take responsibility, what kind of benefit am I really getting from this? And to begin to correlate it with actually walking in responsibility and begin to see what benefit was actually going to be greater. So we can let go of the perceived benefit that we're getting from victimhood and begin to step up and begin to take responsibility. At its heart, a victim mentality is actually a way to avoid taking responsibility for yourself and for your life. By believing you have no power, it gives you an excuse to take no action. I want you to thoroughly understand that. Saying that you have no power to influence or sway these different things gives you the excuse and the reason to take no action. So signs of responsibility. Obviously, an excuse for irresponsibility. Signs for victimhood. The obvious is there's an excuse for everything, right? I have a good reason why I'm not participating inside of my life. And I give all these reasons and all these justifications. And the crazy thing is that people around me see them as valid, right? And what do? They begin to overcompensate. Because what happens inside of a relationship when someone fails to measure up? The other person overcompensates. I'll show you how this works inside of a marriage relationship. Say the dad is in victim mode. He's in self-pity. And he's just constantly focused on himself and his stories and all these different things. He's going to fail to measure up in multiple different areas of his life. But he's going to begin to make excuses. And he's going to give all the reasons why he can't perform and he can't measure up. So the wife has a couple of different choices. But if she's this strong, loving, codependent person, what she'll do is she'll overcompensate. And that means that she will step in and she will take on the load. And so not only is she carrying her load and her responsibility, but she's carrying on the victim's load and the victim's responsibility. Because obviously he's broken and he can't, he doesn't have the ability to do it. He's got this diagnosis, that diagnosis, he's got these pills and that, this, that, and the other thing, right? And so what begins to happen? The codependent gets to get resentments. Now all of a sudden she's carrying double the load, and this freeloader here who is telling stories and stuck in victimhood is not carrying his weight. And so all of a sudden she gets resentments. And she goes, oh, this man, I'm doing double this, that, and the other thing. And he's so ungrateful. He doesn't even step up or do this, that, and the other thing, right? Resentments begin to happen. And what begins to happen is the relationship begins to erode. No relationship survives very long if a win-win is not in place. And that is if I'm stepping up and taking responsibility for myself and what is my responsibility, and the other person is stepping up and taking their responsibility, we come together and we got a win-win because both are pulling the load in the same direction and doing the work. And that is what a win-win is all about. But whenever you get a relationship that is dysfunctional and codependent and it has addiction and it has all these different things, what do you have? You have one person doing double, one person doing not enough. And it erodes the relationship until there's nothing left and it just falls apart. And this is the way victimhood and lack of responsibility plays out. Now, inside of our lives, it happens in a very little fashion, right? That, inside of our family, faith, fitness, and finances, that, we can make excuses in different areas. Let's just say you're not very good at budgeting money, right? You're not very good at getting money, saving money, and you're just not very good with your money. So you got this victimhood story of why this is the case, and you fail to take responsibility in that area, and so you back down in that area of your life. It's not working very well. And it is affecting who? It's affecting your wife, it's affecting your children, it's affecting, your household and your life. Now, the only thing that is going to change that is to drop that victimhood story, begin to take responsibility, begin to ask yourself questions, and begin to grow and expand inside of that area so you can begin to take responsibility for that. That's the only thing that's going to cause it to change. Now, you think that you could pray and ask God to do it for you, but the reality is that He is not going to do that. He's not a codependent. He's not going to do for you what you can and should do for yourself. And so it's only taking responsibility for that area of your life that it's going to change. So we look at the areas of our life, family, faith, fitness, and finance, and we ask ourselves, well, where am I failing to take responsibility? Is it in the area of my health? Am I putting things into my body that don't belong there, right? And it's only taking responsibility for that is going to bring the change. And so the question I have for you today is to look at those areas of your life and ask yourself, where am I not taking responsibility? And it's not very hard to find because it's the area of your life that brings you the most disgust. It's the area of your life that doesn't seem quite up to par, right? It's easy for me to say. My health has always been the one that's dragging along and not up to par. So it's easy for me to look at my health and say, you know what, there's multiple areas that I know that I'm not taking responsibility, I'm not doing what is required, and I could tell by the results and the outcomes that I am getting. So look at the area of your life. Where are you failing to take responsibility? What does responsibility look like inside of that area? If you're into journaling, I challenge you to begin to write this paragraph down. What does responsibility look like in the area where I seem to make excuses and I seem to fail to take responsibility? What does responsibility look like inside of that area? All right, brothers, I will see you next week. Peace.